Hello, and welcome to Marketing 570, Fundamentals of Marketing. This first lecture is really just meant to make you aware of how I like to teach in a virtual setting. So you'll notice that the downloadable PowerPoints for this class have blank lines in them. Those blank lines can be filled out either by listening to my lectures and actively writing down the words that you see on the screen, or the majority of them will be found by reading your textbook. So I like to do this for a variety of different learning types. So some people learn better through the written word, and some people learn better via auditory channels, such as listening to a lecture. So this sort of accommodates both, and it also encourages you to actively pay attention, because I know that when you listen to these online lectures, they can sometimes drag on. The other intention that I have is that most of these lectures will run a maximum of 20 to 30 minutes. And if I decide to go over or I have more to say about a particular chapter, I will just cut that chapter up into smaller bite-sized pieces. And this course is intended to be really an overview of the marketing discipline so that you would be prepared to move forward into a more rigorous MBA marketing class. For this first chapter, we're just going to define marketing, talk about the origins of marketing, bring in a little economic theory of supply and demand, talk about exchange as the foundation of marketing activities, and then we get into the business side, strategic orientations towards business that are impacted by marketing, and talk about customers/consumers. Finally, the chapter ends with a focus on modern marketing or trends that are affecting the field. There are several different definitions for marketing. In this particular one, it's about the management process itself, which identifies, anticipates, and satisfies customer requirements efficiently and profitably. So there you see that we're acknowledging that a business has to be run at a profit, or else it's really not a business, it's a nonprofit. And even those make money, but then are used for other purposes. But also that the customer is at the center of those process activities. The other definition is the American Marketing Association. And that is more of rather than a management process, it's specifically referring to activities, sets of institutions, or processes for creating, communicating, delivering, and exchanging offerings that have value for customers, clients, partners, and society. So a few differences between the Chartered Institute of Marketing and the American Marketing Association definitions, but ultimately, marketing has been and can be termed a function within a business, a department within a business, a discipline of study, a theoretical concept, a business philosophy, or an orientation. When we're talking about a market, this might be the first image that comes to mind. But the key thing for marketing philosophers and scientists like myself is that a market is simply a place where buyers and sellers meet. So that in traditional form, back to the beginning of time when, cavemen traded with each other, it requires, in that case, face-to-face interaction. And then over the course of the last 20 or 30 years, we see that these places where buyers and sellers meet can be virtual as well. As we talk about marketing as a process, we start up here at the top with marketing research and analysis. And that harkens back to the first definition of marketing that talks about identifying consumer needs. And so we do that through the marketing research process or through analyzing data from the consumer or from the market that we have at our disposal to understand the customer better. From there, we develop marketing objectives. From those objectives, we establish tasks. So objectives are more strategic, tasks are more tactical. And then as any process, we need a feedback loop. So we need to be able to make changes and to learn from what we did right and what we did wrong by including that feedback. Just a front note, I am I'm left-handed, but I use my mouse with my right hand. So when I write on these screens, as you'll see throughout the semester, I'm actually writing with my right hand with the mouse. So probably should get some sort of pen for the for the computer screen, but excuse my writing when I do that. Okay. So let's start with market research and analysis. So when we talk about market research, we could be studying the consumer, the competition, the organization, or historical research of what worked well in the past. When we're talking about consumers, that is the market. The market are people with the desire and the ability to enter into our exchange relationship. And so we don't have to study everyone in the world or everyone in the entire population, but just those that are our target market segments. Similarly, we would look at competitive research as really being a form of competitive intelligence. So in the US, it is no longer an excuse to say you don't know what your competition is doing. Not only do we know what they're doing online and through social media, we also can often see what they're doing strategically in the community or in other promotional strategies that they might be having. And to understand competition a little bit more thoroughly, we have to think a bit broadly. So for example, when I was at Southern Illinois University for 14 years, I worked quite closely with the athletics department. We were the only NCAA football within a 100-mile radius, but our director of athletics couldn't understand why people weren't coming to the games. Well, that's because in his mind, the only competition were other NCAA football games. But what our research showed him was that he was competing against other activities on campus, other entertainment options, other diversionary activities that students can engage in on a Saturday afternoon. And what we found for freshmen in particular, the number one reason that they weren't coming to football games was because they were sleeping. So when you think about the competition, you really have to think about the competition for that particular resource, whether that's time or money or effort, but based on your customer's perspective, not based on yours. Organizational research, and my slides here will sometimes alternate between the UK, British spelling and American spelling, and that's just because some of these I've used in my teaching in Europe, so I try to change it up a little bit, but I think you'll enjoy the textbook because it has a bit more of a broader perspective on marketing as well. It's a UK text. But in terms of organizational research, that is looking at internally, what are we good at and what are we bad at? And this should immediately remind you of concepts in traditional introductory business courses called SWOT. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Strengths and weaknesses are internal, opportunities and threats are external to the organization. So we might see some of our competition end up in the T box, for example, the threat of a SWOT analysis. And then looking back at what worked well in the past, is understanding what the organization has done, what the industry has done, what technology has done, and kind of putting it all together to analyze what our next steps are going to be as a business. So this is why really when students talk to me about why I love marketing so much, it's because I love the research side. I love understanding consumers. I love understanding employees. I love understanding other businesses and competition. I love understanding all of the other entities and other environmental influences on our behavior. And whether that's an individual's behavior or an organization's behavior. And that brings us to whether or not we as an organization are risk takers. And this is a challenge because if your organization is not a risk taker, then you may not necessarily be able to capitalize on external opportunities because you don't have the resources or you're worried about expending those resources. Whereas if you are a risk taker, then you may engage in more speculative activities to try to push yourself to that next level. Once we have engaged in market research and analysis to understand who our customers are, who our competitors are, and what our capabilities are, we next have to set some strategic objectives for the organization of where and who we want to be. Where we want to be is usually encapsulated by aims or sort of a future mission outlook of where we want to be in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. And then we have to establish targets. And these targets have to be measurable. So every strategic objective has to be written in a way that is SMART, meaning specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time-bound. Even in this course, for your final project, you will be establishing a marketing plan. And in that quest of writing a marketing plan, you're going to have to write some strategic objectives for your marketing plan. I grade objectives based on whether or not they have a time period, whether they are measurable, whether they are specific enough that we understand that we can reach them, okay? Whether they are relevant to the rest of your plan, and who is going to take action on these. So when we talk about targets that are measurable, that could be anything from increasing market share by 10% by the end of Q3, or improving sales in our domestic market by 3% in the next fiscal year. It might be improving brand image as measured by XYZ within this time frame. Awareness, number of sales outlets, new product launches, customer satisfaction levels, other net promoter score numbers. All of these targets have to be measurable and time-bound in a strategic plan. Those objectives then lead to specific tactics or tasks. How are we going to make each one of those objectives attainable or reachable? And we're going to do that in all different ways. So marketing does have a much broader responsibility in the firm than just simply being a department within the company. Because marketing tasks and tactics that we use to achieve market share goals, sales goals, profit goals, satisfaction goals, etc., they have to be done with the intention of understanding everything from strategic planning at the C-suite level, staffing, setting budgets, promotional objectives, distribution, project and product management, customer management, market entry, branding. All of these tasks are tactics that we take in service of the larger strategic objective. So why do we need marketing? Well, we need marketing, especially in the United States and in capitalistic economies, because of mass production. Mass production, technology improvements, manufacturing improvements, intellectual property and capabilities have led to excess supply of product and service. Excess supply leads to competition. Urban development has led to more middlemen in the distribution process and in the entire marketing discipline. And so really, we used to be much more transactional, which I'll get into at the end of this lecture, meaning all we cared about was the sale. But now, because we have competition, because we have excess demand, or excess supply, sorry, we have to go out and find more demand. We have to build our customer base. We have to build our core capabilities and our value proposition. We have to build those things to grow our customer base and to grow the business. So these are just market classifications. Notice, I will say, notice the difference sometimes with the word market and marketing. Marketing is the process. Market are the people. So the market are people with the desire and the ability to engage in an exchange relationship with you. Marketing is the process of identifying, satisfying those consumer needs in a profitable way. These are just some market classifications that you should know. What is a consumer? What is an industrial buyer or industrial product? What is B2B, nonprofit, government, resellers, overseas, internal responsibilities? These are overviewed in your chapter, so I'm just going to leave that here. You can make some handwritten notes on it if there's more in the chapter that you would like to help you understand those classifications. Now we get into the theory of supply and demand, and this is just your basic economics, where we have price on the y-axis and quantity demanded on the x-axis. And what we find is that as price goes down, demand goes up, and as supply goes up, demand goes up. So what you see here is this interactive effect where the equilibrium point is really right in the middle. This is where your demand, you're priced your product just right so that the quantity demanded is equal to your supply of goods. Now we're going to talk about supply and demand, especially when we get into the chapter on pricing, to understand the different ways of demand-based pricing versus cost-based pricing that sometimes students don't really recognize the nuances of those until we talk about those. But I'll just give you an example here. When you're talking about a desirable concert ticket, or a particular live performance of a band or Broadway musical or something like that, the supply of those tickets is limited to the number of seats in that auditorium. And so if there is more demand than there is supply, then your pricing, you can actually raise the price because there's more demand for that product. Whereas if demand is lower than your supply, then you would want to reduce the price so that you can find the best equilibrium point for those consumers based on their demand and your supply. So that brings us to this inverse relationship between price and sales. As price goes up, most of the time, sales volume goes down. Now, there could be an extended tipping point. So sometimes the more expensive things are, think about the iPhone, for example, price can keep going up and sales continues to rise as well because you're sort of stuck into that technology, or they're either they're the market leader or they're the large star in that particular product category, or there aren't many other alternatives. So there are some exceptions to this. For example, when you are driving and you run out of gas, you're going to pay whatever you need to pay for that gas to get you to your next destination. So this is usually true for a competitive market space. So as price goes up, think about a vending machine. If all of a sudden you had food in the vending machine that cost $5, but the rest of the food costs $1.25 or $1.50, you are not going to see demand for that $5 product. And as price goes down, sales volume, demand, often goes up. So there is this perception of the psychology of sales. For example, when you decrease your price, all of a sudden people will start to demand it more. And again, this is, product category specific, could be industry specific, it could be location specific. So in other parts of the world, we might not see this perfect relationship, but this is the usual economic rules. So when we are talking about the basis of marketing, we're talking about exchange. And that simply means that we have two entities. For lack of a better term, we often call them customers and sellers. And each of these entities has something of value that the other entity wants. And so they're willing to trade that thing of value. So the seller is willing to trade their product and service to the customer, and the customer is willing to trade their payment to the seller. So for a marketing exchange to exist, you need four things: two or more parties, each has something of value the other one wants, each is willing to give up the thing of value they have for the thing of value the other has, and finally, effective communication to consummate the exchange. So communication can be face-to-face, it can be in writing, it can be auditory on a phone, it can be virtual. The text then takes you through what I consider to be kind of the history of marketing from the beginning, and then the possible orientations of a business today. So for example, when we had to make things by hand and we were more of a transactional, nomadic society, we would be in more of the production orientation, meaning that the only way to increase our profits was through reducing the cost of making the products. The product orientation means you're increasing sales through product improvements. The sales orientation means that you're really looking at the transactions themselves as opposed to long-term relationships. So a sales orientation would be like the, nomadic door-to-door salesperson who is going to knock on your door once, get you to buy the vacuum cleaner or the set of encyclopedias, and then leave and move on, and you never see them again. Customer orientation is where you're really researching the customers to make sure that you are giving them the product and the services that they need, leading to customer loyalty and more positive image of your organization. And then finally, a market orientation is where you are looking at long-term profits through not only customer relations that you're building in customer orientation, but also you've built a sustainable competitive advantage within your market. Building on market orientation, just to reiterate that a true market orientation includes both the customers and the competitors, because you're establishing a sustainable competitive advantage over your competitors. So we need to focus on both of them. And a market orientation often requires coordination of all business functions. What that means is that not only does a traditional marketing department have to have some say in the strategic planning of the organization, they also have to have a role in hiring, they have to have a role in finances, operations, and research and development. A market orientation takes marketing research very seriously because you'll notice that both customers and competition and internal kind of self-reflective research is all encompassed under the market research and analysis process. And it has a long-term view of markets and products. When we talk about focusing on customers, we talk about the centricity of a customer to the organization. And that means that we have to be more aware of customer service, even post-purchase. We need to talk about internal marketing, which is making sure that your stakeholders, in this case, employees, are satisfied and performing well and understand how to meet those customer needs and have that market orientation. And then we have to think about how influential our consumers are. And that depends on the product type, the industry, and even the occasion on which they're purchasing. Advantages of a market orientation are many. We understand the customers better, we have better relationships, we have better reputations, we have more customers, more repeat purchases, improved customer loyalty, more motivated staff, and a competitive edge over our competition that is sustainable, meaning that that competitive advantage can be long-term. Lastly, modern marketing. These are some trends that we're going to talk about, not only in your text, but also in your assignments and in your project. And that's understanding the difference between transaction marketing, a one-off sale, a short-term view, often made a hard sell, versus relationship marketing, where we're looking for repeat sales or have a long-term view of an ongoing relationship. Obviously, we want to grow new consumers and build them into recommenders. This is part of the process of understanding that the purchase is only the fourth step in the customer decision-making process, and that the post-purchase phase is just as important in building loyalty and then even building recommendations. And we'll talk about that as we move into the other chapters. Finally, we talk about the 4 Ps a lot as a way to structure marketing classes. Those 4 Ps are the product, promotional strategy, pricing, which many people don't realize is actually a marketing activity, since we have to understand what the customers want and what the customers and the market can bear, and placement, which is just another fancy word, keyword for distribution. Of course, if we're talking about services marketing, we've adopted 3 more Ps, such as physical evidence. That's what customers see when they walk into your service provider or when they encounter your service provider. So think about a restaurant, a dentist's office, or even a website of a bank. People, so in services marketing, the quote-unquote salespeople or the staff that you have that represents your business or your brand is quite important. And then finally, processes. So how do you make a service repeatable and not so variable? Some things about the book that we'll talk about, again, are marketing in the internet age, social changes, information overload, marketing metrics. So your subsequent MBA course in marketing will have a heavy influence on data analytics and ROI, return on investment. And the little M here refers to marketing. So nowadays, it used to be when I started my career 20 years ago, most of my undergraduates, I would say, why are you a marketing major? And they would say, because I'm awful at math. And I would say, well, that's really not a great reason, because in marketing, we're actually just as, if not more so, responsible for establishing the value and the return on investment for our activities, just as a operations manager might be, or an accounting manager might be. So please don't think that marketing does not include numbers. In fact, you'll do some short exercises on that in subsequent modules. So ROMI, and that's going to be important because you will need that for your next marketing required course for the MBA. We'll talk about branding, consumerism, and ethical consumption. And these are all marketing issues that affect us today, but that are also important to keep on the horizon for the future.